Bound by Duty has been in our hands for about 3 weeks, and it's breathed new life into the viability of the Psyker, Zealot, and Veteran classes, making flexible builds a possibility again, which is great because that's kind of the central mechanic of the game. But I can't help but notice there's been a distinct lack of movement in Darktide's current story. We've gotten a ton of lore this year for sure, but it's all been exploring characters' past and backstories, which begs the question, why? Surely all this information must be important for us to have, so what foundation is it building for what's coming in the future? I believe there's a few contenders for what could be the next big development in Darktide, but the most likely option will be an update that addresses Darktide's current biggest weakness. Obey my cat! Hit the subscribe button. Let's start out by making one thing clear. These theories are purely my personal conjecture based on my interpretation of what's been going on in Darktide, what plot threads we know are left hanging, and what we've seen Fatshark do in the past, both in Darktide and its predecessor, Vermintide 2. As of writing this script, I don't know anything about what's coming for the 2025 Quarter 4 anniversary update or beyond, and if I did, I wouldn't be making this video because the fun of speculating would be over. I'd be far too worried about accidentally letting the cat out of the bag, especially if it turned out I was anywhere in the ballpark of being right. So with that out of the way, let's start by diving into the supporting evidence for what I personally feel is the least likely contender for the next big update, going to the second Hive City. Since Darktide's launch, our player characters will sometimes have random conversations about a second Hive City that people will whisper about, but no one will actually acknowledge out loud.
I keep hearing whispers of a second Hive City out there in the wastes. Anything in that?
Subject is classified. It's better that way.
A lot of Darktide's audience speculate that this second Hive City could be the staging ground for a roguelite game mode similar to Chaos Waste from Vermintide 2, and honestly, I agree with this assessment. For those of you who haven't played it, the Chaos Wastes mode of Vermintide 2 has you go into a long multi-mission journey where the goal is to clear all missions in one run. Your character build, talents, and curios all go in with you, but your weapons start as basic gray tier weapons. Throughout levels, you find a currency unique to the Chaos Waste game mode on the ground called Pilgrim's Coins, and these are also awarded for completing challenges and missions. Pilgrim's Coins are used in a few different ways. In missions, you'll periodically find 3 different types of shrines, 2 weapon shrines, and 1 called a boon shrine. Boon shrines will assign you a random extra talent or perk when you interact with them in exchange for 150 Pilgrim's Coins. It's essentially a gamble shrine. Some of the boons are more helpful than others, and if you get the right combinations stacked together with your particular build, you can achieve god tier runs where you just waste everything. For weapons, there are simple upgrade shrines where you upgrade the weapon you currently have to the next tier of rarity. As you continue to upgrade your weapons to the next levels, the Vermintide equivalent of perks and blessings get randomly rolled for the weapon as well. The other type of weapon shrine is another gamble shrine where you can decide to change out your current weapon for a random one of the same power and rarity level the shrine color indicates. Typically, it's 2 levels above the color of your current weapon, but you're not guaranteed to get a weapon you like, and again, perks and blessings are completely random. There's a kind of overworld map before each mission begins, letting you see what the available paths are that your team can take, and it's up to your team to look ahead at what the next mission modifiers are and see what little information you can get about future missions to decide if your group feels better about doing one set of missions over another. Players on your team all get a vote on which mission they'd like to take on next. You'll also get to see where the different stops are along the way for upgrade and healing shrines, where your team can purchase specific permanent boons for your individual characters, as well as purchase one-time items or boons that only apply to the next mission and can help your entire team make it through the pilgrimage. You don't fully heal between missions, and there are potions with effects unique to Chaos Waste that can make it easier to get through. One example being Lifesteal, which gives only you a certain amount of HP back for every enemy killed, or Life Share, which gives everyone but you on your team HP back for every enemy you kill. It's a challenging game mode with random modifiers that keep the game fresh and make every clear feel like a real accomplishment, and you have some agency in trying to stack the odds in your favor by trying to strategize which path to take based on what set of missions your team thinks they'd perform best in. Since the point of Chaos Waste is traveling from one side of the map to the other with required missions on each path branch, a lot of people suspect that if a second Hive City location comes into play in Darktide, this is the purpose that a new location would serve. I think this is an excellent hypothesis and makes a lot of sense that Fatshark would eventually introduce Darktide's version of Chaos Waste, given that Chaos Waste was extremely popular in Vermintide, and both Havoc and especially Mortis Trials have elements of Chaos Waste in them. In fact, Mortis Trials could actually be narratively setting something up like a Chaos Waste game mode in Darktide. Did you ever notice how it's called the Mortis Trials? That's because our characters are being tested. We've actually known about Mortis level operatives since Darktide's launch if you pre-ordered the game and paid attention to the different cosmetic flavor texts. Well, saying we know anything about Mortis operatives from the flavor text might be a bit much considering it says, Mortis operatives are a secret cadre within Grendel's warband, and you aren't cleared for that information. That really doesn't tell us much other than confirming they exist and that they're Grendel's handpicked selects. Stephanie herself actually tells us that the Mortis Trials are a test and that Grendel specifically is watching us.
So, you wish to become a true Mortis operative? Stephanie can help with that. It is training time. Maybe it is also painful humiliation time. Stephanie does not yet know. My master is curious about you. Most people find his curiosity painful.
This all seems to be a perfectly fine narrative runway into actual Mortis level operations for our characters, and it would make sense that the next iteration of the Mortis Trials would be a full-blown mission-based game mode. The reason why I think this is the least likely option for a major Darktide update anytime in the near future is that we've already gotten 2 new game modes in the last year alone. There's the new Havoc endgame, followed closely by the release of the Mortis Trials. Both Mortis Trials and Havoc have elements of Chaos Waste in their DNA. Havoc is a bit less obvious, but the random modifiers that make the game more difficult is an idea that was totally borrowed from Chaos Waste. And of course, Mortis Trials offers the Indulgences, which are random upgrades bestowed on you, or a small pool that you can select from, and sometimes you can get really lucky, roll Indulgences that synergize with your character's build incredibly well, and get god tier runs just like the boons in Chaos Waste. But given that Darktide already struggles a bit with having consistent player numbers between major updates, a lot of us that do play Darktide regularly throughout the year feel the different game modes fracture that core player population and can make it hard to find full teams consistently. Introducing another new game mode so soon before addressing the issues that keep people from wanting to play Darktide on a more long-term basis probably isn't the best next major direction to go in. So, what is Darktide's gameplay hurting for the most? At this point, Fatshark has fixed up pretty much all of Darktide's core gameplay elements that were so bad at launch, they were basically falling off of the game. We have the best item crafting union of unique items and weapon templates from Vermintide 2. We got actual classes with improved, refined, and now rebalanced trees. We got a whole new class. Hell, they even put the missions in a campaign order for us with a continuous plot thread. So why aren't more people playing Darktide? Honestly, it's because the standard mission gameplay loop is stale and lacking enemy variety. Fatshark's predecessor to Darktide, Vermintide 2, launched with 2 complete factions that were visually distinct, and the enemies that were unique to each faction had a better variety in gameplay mechanics. The Skaven have assassin rats, gas bomb rats, fire throwers, machine gunners, and pack masters that would snatch someone up on your team and haul them away. On the Chaos side, you have raiders, chaos warriors, shield chaos warriors, life leeches, and stormcasters. That's a total of 10 enemies that are completely and singularly unique for either faction, 5 on each side. There's no reskins or rehashes made to use in the other faction out of these. There are enemy equivalents in their rosters, like Storm Vermin and Maulers are equivalent to each other, and both sides have berserkers, but they both have 5 very distinct enemies found only in the Skaven or Northmen lineup. Compare that to Darktide and you'll find the count of entirely unique enemies for either factions is overall slightly lower and completely unbalanced toward one faction. On the side of the Mobian 6 scabs, you have Crushers, Bulwarks, Snipers, Trappers, Maulers, and now Plasma Gunners. I am not counting Reapers, those are just tougher gunners. For the Admonition Cult Dregs, there's Poxhounds, Mutants, and Poxbursters. So that's 9 total enemies that are completely unique to either one faction or the other, just 1 under Vermintide 2's total. 6 of them belong to the Mobian Scabs, and only 3 of them belong to the Cult Dregs. But the rest of their individual faction rosters, shotgunners, ragers, gunners, grenadiers, plus all of the trash mobs and basic soldiers all have their own version on each side, or are shared like Poxwalkers and Groaners, since those are turned citizens of Tertium. They're more or less reskins made for either side. They're not unique and mechanically all function very similarly. On top of the reused enemies and the unbalanced unique enemy rosters, there's the fact that so many of the enemies in Darktide's lineup are visually samey, and it doesn't feel like there's 2 distinct factions jumping out at you. And I can drive this point home really well with a simple test. Take a look at these enemy silhouettes from Vermintide 2. Even if you've never played the game, if I told you that one faction is made up of Ratmen and one faction is made up of tribal human cultists, you can probably take a stab at telling me which enemy is from which faction. Now, let's do a silhouette test for Darktide's enemies. Which of these are scabs and which of these are dregs? If you played Darktide a lot, you'll probably be able to tell this apart pretty easily, but when compared to the stark contrast of what are clearly Ratmen versus tribal humans, a lot of these look like generic dudes in various combinations of armor. There's a few that obviously stand out because they're giant ogrins or dogs, but given how similar most of the enemies look, on top of how few completely unique units there are for cultists, Darktide kind of feels like it has 1.5 factions in it, not 2. Compounding this is the fact that we only have 3 monstrosities that you can have a random encounter trigger with throughout standard missions, compared to Vermintide 2's 4. Vermintide had rat ogres, chaos spawns, storm fiends, and bile trolls, while Darktide has plague ogrins, chaos spawns, and beasts of Nurgle. Demon hosts do exist as monstrosities, but they aren't an enemy that spawns in and you're forced to fight. In standard missions, they're an environmental hazard and completely optional as long as a teammate doesn't get thrown into one. And while I know, yes, Darktide is not the same game as Vermintide 2, nor should we necessarily expect it to be, it's still a decent comparison because it was Fatshark's last major title before Darktide that is in this same category of a tied game. Darktide falls short even further from its predecessor because the second Vermintide launched with a total of 4 unique boss fights in its campaign. In Darktide, we still have only 1 major boss fight in the game with the Karnak twins, maybe 2 if you're willing to count the Captain Assassinations or Rolling Steel's Cult Champion. And I lay this all out to illustrate that what Darktide is missing, truly, deeply, and sincerely to the core of what's wrong with its gameplay and content at this point, is enemy variety. We have what feels like 1.5 factions based on the roster of enemies unique to both factions that show up up in regular standard missions. A lot of these enemies both mechanically behave and look pretty similar to each other, and can have a tendency to blend together to the point where you don't even notice if you're beheading dregs or scabs halfway through the mission, which gets boring for a lot of people. We have fewer monsters that will force encounters, and only one true boss fight. In 3 years, Darktide has added the Chaos Spawn, Tox Bomber, and Plasma Gunner as permanent additions to change up the pacing of the gameplay loops of standard missions. 3 years, 3 individual enemies. I hate to do it, but I have to point out that it only took a little over a year for Vermintide 2 to get an entire third faction in the Winds of Magic edition with Beastmen. Fatshark has put a lot of work in these last 3 years in on Darktide, getting the core player mechanics up to the standard they should have been at launch, putting together a fun and difficult endgame mode, putting out missions that progress the story here and there, and a whole new class. Darktide is pretty well polished up and ready to have its weakest point addressed. That's why I sincerely believe that Darktide's next massive update will be fixing the glaring problem of its stale gameplay loop and thin enemy roster. Our chunky aquatic friends and Games Workshop are sitting on a veritable gold mine of exciting enemies that would entice new players and bring back people who abandoned the game after launch. What sinister, iconic, and insanely cool enemies could they bring in that Warhammer 40k fans would just lose their mind over? I know a lot of you are guessing what I'm going to say next, and yes, Genestealers would be a huge addition to Darktide. It's not off the table for whatever the next big update will be either. Genestealers have been telegraphed since Darktide launched, with several conversations about them between the rejects.
Fought Xenos things called hybrid ones, but boss say not to mention them.
Part Xenos that infect human folks. Very badly.
Where there's hybrids, there's a broodlord nearby. Nasty great carcass.
An announcement on the Morningstar calling out sightings that many players attribute to Genestealers. The revelation that the Xanatros Purgation where Morrow dealt with a Genestealer cult really did happen.
Entering Xanatros orbit now. You're sure this is a good idea? We don't even know if Morrow's reliable.
I'm warning you, Explicator.
Interrogator?
That I will not tolerate an infestation of those things aboard my vessel.
Calm yourself, lady. Sergeant Major Morrow has the situation down on Xanatros well in hand.
You had better be right.
And of course, the big bombshell, at least one Genestealer managed to stow away on board the Morningstar itself, presumably from Xanatros.
So much for your claims that the Xanatros contamination would not touch the Morningstar.
I am well aware of the damage even one Genestealer can do.
We don't know how long it was on board or if there could be more, but what we do know is that Resident Ogren, Quartermaster Brunt, killed it himself.
It's a repulsive creature. Are you sure it's dead?
Pulled its head off, then stamped on it. It's a goner.
And now, concerningly, Brunt has been missing for almost an entire year for us as an audience. We don't know how long he's been missing in terms of in-game time.
There's still no word on Quartermaster Brunt's location, I take it.
Not that I know, sir. Funny. You'd think it'd be hard for an Ogren to vanish.
Narratively, it seems like at this point, the threat from Genestealers could potentially come from within, since we know one was on board our ship. Other narrative options for their introduction include what's left of the water cartel having been infiltrated. Genestealer cults often form in the lowest levels of hive cities, where their mutated half-alien features blend in a lot better with other mutant freaks deformed from generations of living in sewage and other waste. And then of course, there's always is Interzone Void Omega 12, a sector frozen in time where environmental storytelling shows us that a massive amount of people used to live and work here, but it definitely seems that something terrible happened however long ago. The hab zone where you enter the mission itself is even called Condemned HL 991119, Hope's End. There's loyalist graffiti proclaiming things like the Emperor will save them, and the word sepulchrum, a Latin word labeling this place as a tomb. However, Fatshark might decide to bring them into the game narratively. A Genestealer cult uprising is an opportunity to add some really iconic and unique enemies into Darktide. There'd likely be a lot of similarities to enemies we already see in the game, in basic human-looking cultists for trash packs, larger obviously Tyrannid human hybrids called neophytes that make up a lot of elites, aberrants that would be more the size of ogrins, all enemy types that we're already familiar with in a Genestealer lineup, but probably outfitted with weapons that feel appropriate to work tools that have been used as makeshift weapons, like pickaxes for those who work in mines. But Genestealers would have their own unique enemies to bring to the table. First of all, they might involve vehicles, since we see Goliath trucks and other vehicles that are either Genestealer friendly or outright vehicles they've been known to have in their roster in the tabletop. Having Xenos drive-bys to deal with where enemies arrive in groups by car could be a fun way to change gameplay. Even if they didn't involve any vehicles though, Genestealers still have units like Magus, which are Psychers, Kellermorphs, which are alien-human hybrid coast combat gunfighters with multiple arms and insanely fast reflexes, and of course pure strain Genestealers, which are full Xenos creatures with deadly claws and are notoriously stealthy. Another potentially exciting feature if Genestealers did come to Darktide is that if they were added into standard missions along with Admonition and the Mobian 6 enemies, it's likely that Genestealers and our existing heretics would fight each other. Genestealers are Tyrannid human hybrids, and Tyrannids and Chaos are notorious for being unable to coexist. Tyrannids have no soul or presence in the warp that the powers of Chaos can feed on, so fighting them is purely an expenditure of their energy for no real gain other than kicking Xenos out of territory they're trying to take. The Genestealers are in the exact same position, as Genestealer cults typically only uprise when a Tyrannid hive fleet arrival is imminent to consume all biomatter on the planet. Demons of Chaos have no true physical form, meaning that a planet overtaken by one of the Chaos Gods offers Tyrannids little in the form of biomass to consume, potentially starving them out by thwarting their efforts. With the siege by Admonition on Tertium in the name of the Chaos God Nurgle, a present Genestealer cult could be prompted to reveal themselves long before a Tyrannid hive fleet is near, in order to prevent the population of the planet being consumed by Chaos first. It's an incredibly fun and exciting possibility, and not entirely far-fetched that Fatshark may end up going in this direction. Back in 2023, Fatshark's devs talked about the work they did for the skeleton minions for Sienna Fueganos's bonus Necromancer career in Vermintide 2. They built her skeleton minion AI from the ground up and designed them to behave more like a separate faction as far as their AI goes, instead of a different type of player bot. In this dev blog they say, "So having done the groundwork, we now have a bit of tech in place for enemies fighting enemies. We're pretty excited toying around with that for the future. A new faction that fights against existing factions in Darktide would be a massive amount of work, which is a big part of why I think we're probably not quite there yet. Darktide has gotten to the point where I'd say it truly entered 1.0 worthy status in September of 2024. Plus, we already have Admonition and the Mobian 6 heavily on the back foot narratively. Throwing a new foe at them to contend with right now doesn't feel like it makes the most narrative sense quite yet. Instead, what I think is most likely to come next is a left hook delivered at our warband directly from Grandfather Nurgle." Something to keep in the forefront of our minds is that Darktide at its core is a war story. It's the fight between order and chaos, where we get to see how the uncaring machinations of both the Imperium and Nurgle chew and spit out common people as the fuel used to achieve their own goals. These are two gargantuan powers at work opposing each other, both acting as unstoppable forces and immovable objects. And yet, both our warband and admonition seem to be just scraping by, making do with the people they are able to convince to lend them their strength and join their cause. In the beginning, with the Mobian 21st numbers thinned out, especially after most of them got turned into groaners, it seemed that the combined might of the heretical Mobian 6 and admonition had our warband on the back foot. But in the last year, our warband has gotten significant reinforcements. We've put a stop to the tainted stim production, rediscovered how to make true Mobian steel thanks to our mysterious ally in Swagger, received backup in the form of the Mobian 53rd Regiment, and now the full force of the Adeptus Arbites has marched onto our ship, ready to dispense justice across all the districts of Tertium. That's not mentioning other victories that we haven't actually seen happen in game, like Morrow storming Admonition's library.
We lost too many grimoires after the accursed Morrow stormed the cankered librarium. We must recover them.
And of course, the massive victory, we sabotaged Admonition's ritual ceremony that seemed to be trying to summon what is likely a greater demon they worship in their cult, putting a temporary stop on their plans and making Wolfer a target of the cult leadership's wrath by making him look incompetent. For the moment, we seem to have the enemy on the back foot, and like I said at the start of this section, this is a war, so we shouldn't expect that Admonition or the Mobian 6 are going to just roll over and accept these lashings we're dealing out. If Wolfer isn't able to fortify the cult's military position, they will likely turn to those who can, the demonic forces of the Warp, and even possibly the Death Guard themselves.
I have just been told there are rumors of things moving in the lower levels. Dark things that are not human, that were never human, and there are things loose. Demon things. Tell the master that. They stir in the shadows of the low hive, but they are clawing their way up to the light.
These excerpts were from Wormwood Vox transmissions 8 and 9. Vox 8 released on Fatshark's YouTube channel in January of 2023, and Vox 9 in September of that same year. By this point in the story, Wormwood had been entrenched in Tertium for at least months, calling for the Morningstar to apprise her of their location, desperately trying to get a message to Grendel regarding the current situation. She had already seen the walking pox and what it's capable of firsthand, so I personally kind of doubt that what she's referring to in these voxes are simply poxwalkers, especially since she references these things in the dark having not been human and they never were human. It very well could be that Wormwood means actual demons have been sighted in Tertium, demons that are different from the beasts of Nurgle or the demon hosts we've seen so far. On the Hourglass Refinery Delta 17 mission, in the finale area, you're able to find a peculiar skull right here. This skull bears quite a similarity to how the lesser demons of Nurgle called Plague Bearers are shown in official art. A single eye with at least one protruding horn from its forehead. Interestingly, this is the mission where we must destroy the Plague incubation pods, which if you look carefully inside of them, you can tell there are humanoid figures in there. Are they people? Are they something else? We can't be sure, but it certainly is interesting, and if Admonition is trying to manufacture demons or even use demons to create new plagues, it fits in with what we've already learned about the mysterious woman tied to Admonition named Ermal, who tinkers biologically with people, performing surgeries using the plagues and presumably the stim goo that alters people and mutates them physically, and experimenting on them. Now obviously, we've already had demons in Darktide for a while. Beasts of Nurgle are also lesser demons of Nurgle, and being entities of the warp, there must be someone summoning them or facilitating their creation into the real world. When we kill a beast, the reason why we see it fade away is because it isn't a physical being, it's a demon and should have no real form. Its solid mass was a temporary state of being until our characters hurting it enough effectively banish it, not outright kill it. However, they don't seem to completely fade back into nothing. Parts of their physical body still remain. So could this be an indicator that Ermal's experimentations have been at work with the beasts of Nurgle and there's something between true demons and manufactured ones? Or is this simply a place to draw the line between lore implication and shit that just happens because the game be that way? Whichever it is, because the beasts of Nurgle fade away at least partially and demon hosts fully disappear when killed or after they kill a member of your team, there must be some warp rift, portal, or powerful sorcerer summoning these demonic entities in from the warp. And where there is one warp portal into the physical world, there is likely a larger variety of demons lined up at the door waiting to get in if they're not here already. Plague bearers, Nurglings, plague toads, plague drones, and heralds of Nurgle are just some of the demonic hosts that could be waiting to wreak havoc in Tertium. If Admonition really is trying to summon a great unclean one as a general of Nurgle's army, the arrival of that kind of greater demon would likely include his reinforcements, which would be a massive amount of lesser demons that follow him. And going back to Heralds of Nurgle, we've also already had a storyline progressing in Darktide that could be pointing us in that direction. Rinda Karnak, sword-wielding maniac and twin sister of Roten, survived her encounter with our rejects during the Orthus offensive and was ultimately saved by Admonition. She's been named their Herald of Admonition, which is a title awfully on the nose compared to Herald of Nurgle. Heralds of Nurgle are a kind of empowered plague bearer called a poxbringer. They're true demons, but instead of being directly from the warp, they are typically created when a mortal human infected with Nurgle's diseases, most often Nurgle's rot, resists dying to his disease and performs deeds that please the grandfather of pestilence so much that specific person gains his favor. Nurgle will grant that individual demonhood, elevating them into a poxbringer, naming them one of his heralds. Heralds are also considered lieutenants in Nurgle's forces, and Rinda Karnak's role under Wolfer was his lieutenant. So we've got several narrative pieces and in-game indicators that could be telling us a full demonic incursion is on the rise. At the same time, there's also been heavy nods to the Death Guard throughout the history of Darktide. First of all, when looking at the 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 tabletop game, the Poxwalkers created by the walking pox disease that has beset Tertium are supernatural zombie mobs that can only be taken as part of a Death Guard detachment. This makes sense lore-wise because the walking pox was actually created by Typhus, Herald of Nurgle, Chaos Lord, first captain of the Death Guard. You may be thinking to yourself, yeah, but that's the tabletop game. That doesn't mean it translates to a video game. But in the Shack News interview that Victor Magnuson did this last summer in 2025, we actually learned from Darktide's lead design director himself that Fatshark does use the codexes to inform game design and balancing decisions.
You guys have a lot of weapons and tools and stuff like that. Do you guys look at the codexes and like kind of go, okay, so this gun's super powerful, this is what AP2 is? Like, do you guys look at that stuff when you're adding stuff into the game and try to make it as close to the codex right as possible?
Yes, I currently have a codex on my desk back in Sweden. I won't tell you why, but I am looking at some stuff, yes.
Space Marines confirmed, right? That's the...
So after the release of the Arbites, Magnuson had a codex on his desk in Sweden, but he can't tell us which one. Interesting. Along with Poxwalkers requiring a member of the Death Guard in order to exist on the battlefield, there's also the appearance of the Miasmic Malignifier, a Death Guard demonic fortification unit. These started showing up sporadically throughout Darktide levels back in 2024 with the Path to Redemption update, its first appearance that I'm aware of being in the reworked finale of Hab Draco near the Phage Tree. They've since appeared in other mission locations like the Hourglass and on the train that we're trying to to stop in rolling steel. They always seem to appear where the admonition cult specifically has a heavy presence, not in zones where enemy activity is specifically by the Mobian 6. And of course, there's the Comsplex 154 mission in Enclave Embarrass, where we get to see a snippet of the heavily classified message that we sent at the end in the mission's debriefing cutscene. In my opinion, this is the real smoking gun that the Death Guard and Demons are looming on the horizon for Darktide. It says Deployment Log Terminator Squads Recon Scout Drone Class. As far as named forces with current models in Warhammer 40k goes, Terminators pretty much solely puts us at looking at Space Marines. In that same interview I referred to earlier, Darktide's lead design director Victor Magnuson made it clear that player Space Marines or even NPC loyalist Space Marine support is off the table.
You play as a human. That is the goal of the game, to portray like the human side of Warhammer 40,000 and how it would be to be a normal person, or at least like maybe a military, but like quite capable, but still a human being, and not like space god, space marine that lives for 10,000 years and is able to like kill everything they see.
That really narrows down our options even further for what that in-game message could be referring to Chaos Space Marines, most likely members of the Death Guard. Drones could easily be a reference to plague drones. The inclusion of at the very least demons, if not the Death Guard itself, would make a lot of sense because they would likely be reinforcements specific to admonition, which if you remember, only has 3 units that are completely unique to their roster compared to the Mobian 6's 6 to 7 units, depending on how generous you want to be about the Reapers. The cultists are very much lacking in their own robust roster of elites and specialists, leaving the perfect window to usher in the full demonic might of Nurgle to round them out. For the Death Guard, it's entirely possible that one of Admonition's 3 leaders is actually a member of the Chaos Space Marine Legion himself. Fatshark has also already laid the foundation that as far as the lore is concerned in Darktide, Space Marines are not unkillable demigods. Sergeant Major Morrow has already proved it.
Drone! What the hell is that, Sarge?
That's death, pure and simple.
Fucking hell! It's seen us!
All right now, Opus. Weapons up. Bring it down.
Why do you think this memory was included in Morrow's past? It further establishes his total Chad status, yes, but it also shows us point blank that even a squad of basic guardsmen with standard equipment and a smart, effective leader can take out a Chaos Space Marine. And if you think that I'm completely cuckoo bananas and must not know a goddamn thing about Warhammer 40,000 if I think that our player characters in Darktide can take on a Chaos Terminator like a Blight Lord, much less a standard member of the Death Guard, you're gonna want to subscribe so you don't miss next week's video. Because next week, I'm gonna prove that from a tabletop gameplay perspective, that assumption is 110% factually, unequivocally wrong. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. Special shout out to my top supporters, Leah S., Andrew Brown, Cabus, Rich, William McQueen, Ben, Darkslide, Cameron, Commander Orf, Ginge Dread, Yellow 13, Ripped Limbo, El Zunix, Sam Wolcroft, The Speedy Turtle 4, Lord Pingu, Naomi the Taken Queen, Greg Burrow, Epic Gamer, Cthulhu 625, Mr. Schrodinger, Spazatron, Jason Clark, Hee Hee, Mateo, CT5334, Evan Berger, Yin, Bad Cat, Sexy Rotfly, Kron Chaos, Daniel Gerber, The Thunder Guardian, Aubrey Bessie, Freedom Frank, Macrove, Nicholas Lucas, Mr. Matchbox, Noctis 2341, Benjamin Ramnick, Misanthropocene, I Am Mordred, Ryu Jin, Frederico Lopez, Epsy, Cassie Bear, Spooky Spoopy, Cyber Leader Andy, Crafty, Nick Newsom, Lormock, Martin Grimes, Ms. Blackfire, and Big Guy.